dictation books. In the morning, after she would get the notes, she would go into work, and she would sit at a typewriter with Bill, and she would tell Bill what the notes were, and Bill would type the notes. The notes that Bill typed came to be known as the urtext. That was the urtext. Now, in the urtext, there are several things that go on. Number one is, she didn't tell Bill all the messages, all the notes that she got. So she didn't give Bill like all of the notes from the dictation. And number two is, as Bill was typing the notes himself, she would get messages from Jesus as to things to add in or things to correct. And then that would be what got included in the urtext. So that took place over the course of 7 years. In the middle of that period of time, there was, during what was going on, I'm gonna pull this up. One of the things that happened was Jesus gave Helen a directive. And the directive was how to put together what he wanted A Course in Miracles to be. Okay, and I'm going to read a note to sort of show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to read just a short paragraph. So this is sort of one of the directives, not all of them, but this was one of the directives that were given as to what miracles was actually supposed to be, and what had been taking place while she was taking the notes. So here's the paragraph. It says, note that the much more personal than usual notes you are taking today reflect the revelatory experience. This does not produce the more generalizable quality which this course is aimed at. They may nevertheless be of great help to Bill personally, since you asked for something that would help him personally. It depends on how he listens and how well he understands the cooperative nature of your joint experience. Okay? Then he goes on to say this. You can help only by reading this note first. Now here's part of the directive as to what's supposed to occur. Ask him later if this should be included in the written part of the course at all, or whether you should keep these notes separately. He is in charge of these decisions. Okay? So there's a directive from Jesus to Helen to tell Bill that he's in charge of the decisions as to what stays in the notes and becomes A Course in Miracles, and what is taken out of the notes that's excluded from the Course in Miracles. And the criteria is generalizable for application for anyone. Because this is the way it works. When you have an experience of revelation, it's a very, very personal communication between God and you, wherein which you experience His love as being, your being in a sense. When that happens, you're open to much more personal understandings about you specifically. And when after Helen would have these revelatory experiences, she would get specific understandings about her and her relationship with Bill and her relationship with others and about her job. But when she was just taking the notes for Jesus, Jesus was giving her the basis of a mind training program to train your mind in a systematic way in order to heal your mind of the perception of separation, so as you can begin to realize who you are, learn that you are God's love, learn to listen for the Holy Spirit, and then use the Holy Spirit as how you go through your life so that you can know and learn the laws of the kingdom, how they operate truly in you, and how you can be a miracle worker in service to the plans of the atonement. The course was supposed to be generalizable enough for anyone. So after she would have these intense experiences of revelation, the notes were too personal, and unless Bill was able to make use of them or put them together in a generalizable form, he was to exclude those notes. And he would know what to include because he was a professor and he was teaching abnormal psychology courses, and this was a psychotherapeutic course in healing separation and healing the ego in order to bring about health, which is considered inner peace, which is literally a state of healed mind. So all therapy is psychotherapy because all therapy is of the mind, and this was designed to be a mind training to heal people's minds. So there's a couple of other instructions where Bill is told personal notes pertaining to particular people should be excluded. So those were the directions by which he was supposed to be the editor of A Course in Miracles. So Bill takes the text, that document that he types every day with Helen, and he begins a process of editing it. When he is done editing it, it becomes this document that they take to the Edgar Cayce Library to show to Yu Lin Cayce. Okay? Hence the title, the Yu Lin Cayce version. The Yu Lin Cayce version is the edit of the text that Bill made based on the instructions that they were given from Jesus. Now, there's really no dispute about the workbook and the manual for teachers. In every edition, they're fundamentally the same. There may be a word or two different. But the dispute has always been about the text. Okay, so here Bill has edited this version of A Course in Miracles based on the information and the mandate that Jesus has given to him. And he's produced a document that the text becomes the Yu Lin Cayce version, but the overall document is his contribution to what Jesus wanted the Course in Miracles to be. Okay, so Ken Wapnick comes along, makes friends with Helen, looks at the Course, goes away to Jerusalem, comes back a year later, and Helen shows him the Course again. And what he is being shown is Bill's edition, which we call the Yu Lin Cayce version. They're virtually one and the same. When people talk about them, they're one and the same document. He reads it through, and he tells Helen it needs further editing. So now, he's had A Course in Miracles for 3 months, and he tells Helen it needs further editing. Bill sees the handwriting on the wall in their relationship and leaves and sort of moves. And Ken begins this process with Helen where every night he goes to Helen's house and they edit the document that Bill had edited. So when he's referring to the process of editing, he's referring to the process of editing the Yu Lin Cayce version. Now, when I read what he says about the editing process, and a couple of things have come to mind since then. Okay, number one, the Course in and of itself, what it actually says is, in order for you to really understand what this course is about, you have to become familiar with the text, which is the theoretical framework around which the lessons can make sense, and do the lessons, which is one lesson a day for 365 days, and then begin to familiarize yourself with the process that's talked about in the manual for teachers. Okay? So now, obviously, if the centerpiece, if the actual mind training that's designed to bring about the experience that A Course in Miracles is meant to bring about, which is literally learning to turn within by a process called forgiveness in order to begin to hear within yourself guidance as to how and what you learn and how to use your mind. Okay, and that lesson plan is 365 days, and it's related to the theoretical framework that is the text. And then in order to understand how you begin to work with the Holy Spirit in your mind and you work interpersonally with other people, you need to read the manual for teachers, okay? So now, anyone who has not gone through the workbook and actually began to hear the Holy Spirit within him or have Jesus teach him the course within has not actually done the book, so they do not know what the book is about, or could they possibly have had the experience that the book is bringing you to, because as a required course, it actually takes you, as the course itself says, doing the 365 lessons. So Ken comes on the scene after 3 months of reading this. He could not have possibly done the lessons. He thinks he knows what it says, and he sets out to edit it. Bill bows out, and then Ken begins to edit it with Helen. And that goes to the 3 pages that you were reading. Okay? Now, since this book has come out, and in the course of the court case, Ken has changed the story several times. But I'm going to look at a couple of things that he says in this book. Absence from felicity. Okay, now I want you to hear this from me, and I'm not saying Ken's done something wrong, unforgivable. I'm just looking at what's occurring in what he's saying based on the editing. Okay? Well, let me say this. So when you hear the Sparkle edition or see the Sparkle edition, what you're seeing is a book that was put back in the form at the time that we could, to the best of our ability, was put back into the text being what Bill had actually edited to be. So we took the Yulin Casey manuscript and made that into the text, and then put it together with the workbook from the text, as well as the manual for teachers. The directive that we received was to change the clarification of terms, which is at the back of the edit that Foundation did, put it at the front, and restore it from Jesus. There were 5 of us working on it, and as we worked it, we would all receive the same directions. And put it at the front of the book, because it makes more sense to understand what the terms are referring to prior to reading the book rather than after you read the book. And the thing that we were told to do was turn it back to its original title, which was Use of Terms. So in the Sparkle edition, you have the use of terms at the front of the book, Bill's edit of the text, the workbook, and the manual for teachers. Okay? So there's a lot of material that Ken decide to edit out. The major thing that he edited out was the term soul. In the clarification of terms, which becomes the use of terms, he says soul is too controversial, so it was taken out, only used when it was in biblical quotations. When you read the Yulin Casey version, Jesus, for 8 chapters, is constantly referring to the nature of the soul, what you are as a soul, how he remembered the purpose of his soul, how the soul relates to both spirit and mind, how the soul is actually part of the kingdom of heaven. And soul is this important term because the course, first 8 chapters also deals with the abundance of the kingdom, which is the natural condition of you as a soul in the kingdom. All of that got edited out. What also got edited out was a lot of the correction that Jesus gave for Freud's use of his psychological terms that he developed, such as the defense mechanisms. Jesus reorients the use of the defense mechanisms to show you how they actually stem from your real mind, but were turned around and used against you. And when you see them rightly, they can be used for you to protect the truth rather than to deny reality and make a world of perception that seems to be against you, that seems to cause you to live here as a body in space-time. So I just want to take. So are there any questions yet about anything? Hold on one second. Anybody here? Vicki has a question she wants to ask me. Well, that's where Doug says that might have been the case.
What was Vicki's question?
No. Vicki's question was, who wrote the clarification of terms? Okay, so the clarification of terms, which we return to the use of terms, and I'll tell you why. After Ken had finished editing the course, all of a sudden they realized there were terms that are being used in ways that are not traditional. So he asked Helen, he says, I think we need a glossary. So he lists a bunch of terms that he would like definition for. Helen tries to do it, but she can't do it. After a few days, all of a sudden she begins to hear the voice tell her, this is what Ken says, give her this dictation. And that becomes what Ken calls the clarification of terms. The problem is, many people actually think that parts of that were actually sort of, maybe put together Ken rather than received from Jesus. My feeling is there were some that did come from Jesus, but that Ken sort of set the framework for it and may have been responsible for sort of the introduction to the clarification of terms. Now, the reason why we were told to change it back to the use of terms was for this reason. Working with the Course in Miracles, the practice is that you are supposed to, when you come to something that you don't understand, turn your mind over to the Holy Spirit or Jesus so that you can receive the right understanding for you to advance based on them teaching it to you from within. Literally, what it says is, what I was told is this: clarification of the terms is the function of the Holy Spirit, which is the light of understanding within your mind. So for the terms to be clarified for you, or for you to see the terms based on the light of your mind, it is necessary for you to turn within to the Holy Spirit so that you get clarity, literally lucidity, from the Holy Spirit as to how you are to understand the terms. Use refers to how the terms are used within the vocabulary or the lexicon of words that Jesus offers very particular ways to understand that are not traditional, based on the use of language or the English language today. Okay, and those are numerous. There's a ton of them. One of the major ones is the word world. So when you hear the word world, what Jesus actually is telling you world means, when the term world is used, like when he says there is no world, the definition of world that he's asking you to use is a grand division. So the term world is synonymous with the phrase a grand division. So when Jesus says there is no world, what he's telling you is there is no grand division between things. Okay, and another one is this. The idea of when Jesus says change your mind, okay? He gives a very specific understanding of what change your mind. When he says you have to change your mind, okay? What he says, this is the understanding that he offers. So when you hear the word change your mind, you need to change your mind. You have to have a shift in perception. You have to change your mind. The change of mind that he's telling you has to occur is the shift from listening to the voice of the ego, which serves the grand division or the world, and then use your mind by placing it at the service of your soul. So when he says change your mind, what he's saying is place your mind under the authority of your soul, not under the authority of the illusion of separation or the world of space and time. Now, the truth is, you don't know how to do that, but you can ask how it can be done for you. That's how you get in contact with the Holy Spirit. So to change your mind is to say, wow, my mind is serving the ego or the idea of separation, which is effectively making up a world of separation around me. I need to change my mind, or change my mind from focusing on that to turning where I'm already in communication with my soul, and allow my mind to be put in the service of the soul, so that my mind can be rightly oriented to who I am in reality and what my function is as God created me to be. That's what change your mind means. To do that, you need to ask for help, because to join with your soul, you need something that knows how to show you how to do that, rather than keeps you turning to the ego. And you need something to help you break that habit of listening to the world around you based on the idea of separation. So to change your mind is to place your mind in service of your soul. That's Jesus' use of the words change your mind. It does not mean change your perception as to the way you see the world. It means take your mind and place it at the service of the soul, and when you experience the reality of your soul, when your mind is serving your soul, your experience of everything will be entirely different than it is when your mind is serving the ego and you're getting the effects of the ego. That's what is meant by change your mind. Okay, does this make any sense? Is this helpful, or? Okay. So let me just take a look at something that, like what Ken is saying here. So I assume, okay, I'm gonna 364. Here's what it says. The paragraphing, punctuation, and capitalization which rarely had any bearing on the teaching itself, nonetheless became a major focus of our work, one obvious reason being the distraction value they held for Helen. During her retyping of the text, Helen imposed on the manuscript her peculiar idiosyncrasies of having most paragraphs be 9 lines, almost always regardless of the content of the material. So now, here's the first indication that there's a distinction between the form and the content. Now, I just want you to listen to this carefully because you're going to see what happens. Helen thankfully did not object to our correcting these. Okay, notice, he's saying he decided on the corrections and Helen says okay. Okay? That's not the instruction that was given to Helen as to how the course was to be edited. The instruction was Bill was responsible for what would stay in and what would come out based on some very simple, very simple directives. Okay, here. More than one reader has commented on the course's use of semicolons, which often were used in place of the more proper colon. This too was Helen's preference. As we began to go through the text, I discovered that Helen had two comma philosophies, excessive and minimal. I cannot recall, and in parentheses, denial sometimes serves a meaningful, merciful purpose, how often, when Helen would suddenly decide on a comma philosophy change well into the editing. Okay, notice, there's no indication at this point in time that they're asking Jesus to help them at all. This is based on Ken thinking it should read a particular way, altering Helen's punctuation, and now he's going to begin to alter more than just Helen's punctuation, based on how he would like the course to read, and literally the way he wants the form to look. Okay? In the end, we arrived at a decision to over comma in the hope that this would be of more help to a reader already having to struggle with the difficulty of the course's concepts, not to mention its awfully complicated sentence structure. Okay, now, he can only be talking about himself in that sentence, because there was no other reader at this point in time but him. He's the reader who's saying it's complicated and complex. Okay? The only problem is he's not done the lessons of A Course in Miracles. So he does not really know what this is designed to bring about yet, which is turning to the Holy Spirit for correction, to get his understanding as to how you're supposed to proceed. Now here's Ken saying him and Helen edited this book, but it's mostly him convincing her as to what the form is supposed to be. Okay? I am not sure to this day how consistent we were. There are still some changes I would be tempted to make, and I am sure many course students feel should be made as well. Now listen to this though. Listen. However, the content of the course was never jeopardized as a result of our editing. Now, if they're strictly focused on the form, and the content of the course literally is learning to look within, saying that the only way you can even consider knowing what this course is about was by having an experience based on doing what it says, and that would require, having done the lessons for a year, after 3 months of having worked with it and deciding that you don't like the form because it's complicated and complex, where really is the problem and what's occurring? Is there more focus on the form than on the content? And how could he possibly know if the content actually suffered if in fact he hasn't had the experience that the content is leading him to, nor has he at one point in time yet, in however long he's been editing the course with Helen, decided to ask Jesus or the Holy Spirit what they would like? That is the course. Helen often had fits about the use of sentence splices or incomplete sentences, but knew that these were an important part of the course's presentation, serving the stylistic purpose of added emphasis. We kept all these despite Helen's better judgment. So what he's saying is, Helen knew enough that if Jesus was saying it, her judgment was useless. Ken had yet to learn that. He said, although, at the urging of a friend who was a professor of linguistics, we did change in later editions some of the more glaring dangling participles. Okay, so he has yet to consult Jesus as to what the course is supposed to be. On top of it, the directive was given to Bill as to what should be included and what should be taken out. Finally, there was the capitalization. One can see an evolution in Helen's style as one traces the course from its original dictation in the notebooks. Okay, now, that could only be possible. Am I gone? Can you guys hear me? Okay. That could only be possible if, in fact, he was using the dictation from the notebooks. But he couldn't possibly have been it because he just said what they were editing was the Yulin Casey version. So he's saying we're working on editing the Yulin Casey version. That's what we're editing. He's talking about an evolution that he must have found out later. Okay. The process culminated in Helen's feeling that every word, even remotely, a slight only exaggeration on my part, associated with God should be capitalized. Then he goes into this whole thing. Here, in the Yulin Casey version, the one we were editing, Helen's capitalization was quite inconsistent. While I did originally try to talk her out of what I believed to be excessive stylistic emphasis on God's divinity. So Ken thinks there's excessive stylistic, what does he say? Emphasis on God's divinity in A Course in Miracles. And he thinks it shouldn't be there, not having had an experience of God yet himself, nor having done the workbook of A Course in Miracles. I soon abandoned this fruitless endeavor and ended by saying to Helen that I would capitalize the course words any way she chose to have them be. This clearly appeared to appeal to her sense of logic, and so we set out in writing the rules of capitalization we would follow, and kept to these the best we could. Okay, he has yet to ask Jesus, or Helen has yet to ask Jesus, how we should proceed. Okay, now, the interesting thing about it is, when it came to the court case, Ken said, oh yes, Helen consulted Jesus as to all of our editing. She was always asking Jesus. In this book, he's going to say, generally speaking, I would do the editing, and Helen would be asleep before the time I left. So much of the time I was left to do it on my own. Now listen to this. This is the sentence that really got me. All in all, This part of the editing was a most valuable exercise in practicing the important principle from the course of recognizing the distinction between form and content, namely that it is the purpose or meaning that gives the form its importance, not the form itself. In this case, the content of love was expressed in understanding that these manipulations of the form had no importance when placed next to the value of joining with Helen. Okay, now, here's the only thing. The Course is saying join with Jesus, not with Helen. All you can join with Helen is in purpose. You can't join with Helen's whole mind, because it is Jesus and the Holy Spirit's whole mind that offers you the understanding of the form so that you can have an experience of the content, which is love. So at no point in time did he actually use what the Course is actually teaching to edit what the Course is saying, and he hadn't even taken the Course prior to the editing because he only had it for 3 months. So for me, there's a line in the special messages, and what Jesus says is, I will correct all errors retroactively. And this, I think, goes to the point. As a matter of fact, Jasmine, he's always said that he has not. Here's what he says. There is no voice to be heard, and there is no light to be seen. So when the Course talks about a voice, it's not that you are going to hear a voice talk to you. Okay? That's quite frankly not true. He also says you don't really see a light, because light is blah whatever he says. That's quite frankly not true either. Okay? He also claims that there was nobody named Jesus. Jesus in the Bible is not the author of A Course in Miracles. Jesus is merely a symbol and was never really a person as you and I are at all. He was a symbol. Yeah, he said that in court. He's also said that in many things he's written. So what I'm saying is, and this will sort of be like what goes to what, okay, Jesus did allow for it to get out, but only so in the future the entire Course can be used as demonstrating his ability to correct everything retroactively. Because in fact, in 1986, when I discovered there was more material that had been left out of the Course because it had been edited so drastically, what Jesus said to me was, don't worry, all the material will be made available to you. And what's occurred over the course of these 24 years is all the material has been being made available to us. So basically, that's the difference. That's the difference. The editing job was meant to be done by Bill, following the guidelines Jesus had given him. The Blue Book was what was edited by Ken based on his decision as to what needed to be edited. Now, there's some glaring things that show up as missing when you compare the first 8 chapters to, say, the Sparkle, and especially when you compare the first 8 chapters to, say, the Urtext. One of the things that I have come to understand is that while there is no problem having the Urtext be available, the Course is really designed, A Course in Miracles, as Jesus would like A Course in Miracles to be made available, is designed to be like a textbook for a course that you take in order to achieve a purpose, and the purpose is the purpose he intends for you to achieve, which requires that you use your mind to learn to contact him so that he can teach you the Course from within, so that you can learn what it means for you so that you can finally get in touch with the Holy Spirit and have Him work with you to help you awaken from the dream, so that your mind is useful to the Holy Spirit and Jesus and the plan for atonement. Ken says there's no plan. Well, I don't know what it should look like, but I do know what it's supposed to be, which is exactly why we did the sparkle the way we did the sparkle. So, and it's also why I want to like print up some more and make them available. I wish Doug had come by, because there was some things I wanted to talk to him about this. Because I do think just within the last year or so, I was given a new instruction as to how to go back into the material so as to pull more out in order to expand the core of the course so that the sphere of influence that it has grows. And yet that's going to require a collaborative effort, and I feel that that's something that Doug and I and at least one or two other people really need to be about. So I don't know, I don't know if that got to, the questions that, you guys had that, Melissa invited me into the room to talk about, because Melissa, I think she's gone, and I think that's because she's selling a trailer or something. So Jasmine, what I'm going to say about it being my point of view is that the point of view that I'm expressing comes from the guidance that I've received when I've asked questions and gotten answers. So in that regard, I can't claim it to be like a personal point of view. It is a way that I've been given to understand the events that transpired, as well as a way that I've been given to understand the course and what it's designed to do for me, and how Jesus is working through me, and how the Holy Spirit works with me. So I don't feel like it's a personal point of view, because there's no way I would ever be able to formulate that point of view. I would never have the information. I don't have I only get it because when I ask, I'm given things to understand. And that basically comes from the way I began using the course when I first got it. The way I was taught to use A Course in Miracles was to read it and work with it, and as I worked with it, contemplate what it was I was reading, and turn my mind to the Holy Spirit and Jesus, and let them tell me how I was to understand it. So when there was things that I needed understanding about because I wasn't getting the experience that was behind it, I would stop and I would contemplate it, and literally Jesus would step in and would begin to teach me from within, much in the same way that he taught Helen from within when she had questions herself. But not having read the text at that time, I didn't know, that was sort of like the process that Jesus actually uses with everyone who turns to him to be taught the course from within. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.